everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Proud to Work in Cannabis podcast, another very hot summer day in Colorado. Today, I'm extremely excited to be joined by somebody else in Colorado, in Boulder, Colorado. I'm joined by Nancy Whiteman, who is the founder and CEO of Wana Brands, and now the founder of the Wana Foundation. For those of you who don't know about Wana Brands, which if you're listening, you probably do, they're North America's #1 top-selling cannabis product. Nancy has been referred to as the Queen of Legal Cannabis by Inc. magazine, the Martha Stewart of edibles by Entrepreneur, and she's a total legend in the space. I was extremely excited when she agreed to do this episode. Nancy, thank you so much for joining me. How are you today?
I am great, and thank you for that amazing introduction. I so appreciate that.
So Nancy and I were chatting a little bit about this before we went on to the show. There's a ton of information about Nancy in the world of cannabis. You can do a Google search and you can go very deep on her story. So we're not going to spend a ton of time doing what we normally do on this show, which is more of a how I built this, because I have, as an operator myself, I have some tactical operational questions for Nancy. But for people who are listening, Nancy, who may not know your story, can you take us back to 2010 when your daughter had a friend over and you were talking to the daughter's friend's father about what he did? Can you bring us to that day?
Yes, totally. It's like it was yesterday, although, my God, it was 13 years ago. That's actually completely true. My daughter had a friend over and her dad came to pick her up. And he was a commercial real estate developer, which if you were in Boulder in 2010, that was not the best business to be in. So I said, "So how's everything going? What are you doing these days?" And he said, "Oh, you wouldn't approve." And of course, that immediately got my attention. I wanted to know what I wouldn't approve of. And he told me that he had started an infused soda pop company. And while I was very familiar with cannabis, actually medical cannabis was new in Colorado back then. And so I wasn't familiar with the terminology, shall we say, of cannabis or marijuana, as we called it back then. And I said, "Oh, what's it infused with?" And he said, "Marijuana." And I'm like, "Oh, I didn't know that was a thing. That's a thing." And so long story short, we ended up building out a kitchen with him. He had sort of a rudimentary beverages company going, and we built out the kitchen so we could start making edibles. And it was about as bootstrapped as a business could possibly be, with testing non-medicated product in our home kitchen and then testing medicated product outside of the home, since we had school-age children at home at that point. And actually literally bootstrapped it from there with a very small amount of money. Like so many startups, we had not really quite nailed what it was that we were going to be when we grow up, right? So, and Carson, I know your business has evolved a lot since you started it in your dorm room when you were in college, which is so impressive. But, we started out with a little bit of everything from nuts to brownies to, infused jerky at one point in time. But really the thing that we started doing about a year and a half into the business was making gummies from scratch. And at that point, there were not really any gummies from scratch on the market. And who knew? Because there was no analytics companies back in the day. And so we didn't know that gummies were going to sort of be the category. But they did. They turned out to be the killer category within edibles. And we spent years refining our recipe. And here it is 13 years later, we're in 16 states and getting ready to launch in several more, and 9 provinces in Canada. So it was quite a journey.
And one of the things I read that you wrote, it was in an article. You said that you would go to dispensaries and it sounds so simple, but you stopped selling them things they didn't want and you doubled down on things they did want. And I think so many times when I hear people getting ready to start their business, they're hiring MBAs to look at the market. They're doing market research. They're buying all these tools. They're buying all these things. And I read that and I was like, oh my God, it's so true. Like, can you just talk a little bit more about just like the getting out there and selling and learning? And
Yes.
yeah, I'd love to just hear more about that.
Well, totally. Well, here's the funny thing. I actually have an MBA myself and actually ran a corporate market research department. So it was not for lack of knowing about what I was supposed to be doing. But, it really didn't matter back then because even if you'd had all the money in the world, which we did not have to do market research, everything was so new that it would have all been theoretical anyway. All that really mattered was what are you going to put out there and what are people going to try and what are they going to buy and what are they going to like? Nothing else actually mattered. And what I figured out pretty early is that it would cost me less to take a flyer on making some products, putting them in some packaging, getting them out there, and seeing how they did. That would take actually less time and money than it would have taken to do a formal market research study. So, it having starting in a brand new industry makes you very, very pragmatic and very scrappy. And I think that there's still some of that spirit. I think that people would do well to emulate, even though now we do have analytics and we can look at all the categories and we do have information that wasn't available. But yeah, sometimes you just have to, rip up the 5-year plan and go out and try some stuff and see what happens.
And I want to back up to that, but just so people can get a sense of where the business is now. You not even recently, a couple years ago, you sold the business. I think it was one of the largest private. I think it is the largest private exit in cannabis for $350 million to Canopy. What was what
Yes.
was that process of going through the sale like?
Oh my gosh.
Okay.
It was, I'm laughing because there was at the Cannabis Marketing Summit, not this past year, but the year before, I was on a panel that Khadija Tribble was moderating, and I was on with Chris Walsh and I can't remember the other person who was on with me, but Khadija asked the question to Chris, who was then the editor of MJ Biz, was there any transactions this year that were a surprise to you? And he said, well, that Warner Brands Foundation was kind of a surprise. And I said, yeah, me too. So, it really was, an amazing outcome. But it was an outcome that we spent about at least 2 years prepping for, to be honest with you. And when I say prepping for it, I don't mean I spent every moment, plotting about my exit and how am I going to do this. But there were some practical things. In fact, they were baked in almost from the beginning that we did. First of all, and you've sort of alluded to it, because we didn't have a ton of money, and I also didn't raise any money, I learned very early that I had to cash flow and I had to be profitable. So we had that very much in our favor, that we were extremely profitable. And that enabled us to do a deal based on EBITDA rather than a revenue multiple, which was key. We also had 2 years of audited books. Um, and we also had an extremely simple cap table. At that point, my partner had exited and I was the sole owner. I was the only person on the cap table. So it was the world's easiest transaction for Canopy to diligence and very, very easy deal to put together from that perspective. Very complicated from other perspectives because they're a publicly held Canadian company and they were buying a plant touching US company. So it had a very unusual deal structure where it actually was what they purchased actually was an option to buy the company. They didn't actually purchase the company, and in fact are still in the process of working on that piece of it. But we spent 2 years obviously getting all the financials in shape for the data room. And then we just talked to a lot of different people. And I would really encourage anybody who's thinking about going through this process to go through that process. Because if you are at all like I was so not knowledgeable about this process. I don't have a finance background, that when people would say, well, what are you looking for? I wasn't really sure how to answer that. I was looking for someone who would, first of all, care about the brand and nurture the brand. as I had done for 11 years at that point. And also someone larger with more resources that I felt could get us ultimately where we wanted to go faster and more strongly than we could do on our own. And aside from that, I didn't know. There was that was the height of the SPAC craze. And it was you need to talk to private equity people. And oh, I would be talking to CPG people outside the industry. And I would be, well, obviously it's an MSO. So we talked to everybody and their brother. And it was an incredibly useful exercise because by going through that, that's how I got myself educated on what I wanted and what I didn't want. And a lot of this comes down, I would say, to chemistry. And is this, first of all, people that I could imagine working with? And then, secondly, are these people who I think genuinely care about Juana's mission? We're a very mission driven company. And I didn't want to lose that. And I didn't want to sell the company to somebody who really was so bottom line focused that that's the lens through which they were going to be doing all of their thinking and all of their decision making. So it was a long, drawn out process, as these things can be. Um, and I laughingly, I've shared this with Cannabis, with Canopy, excuse me, but we actually had spoken with them many years before when we were looking for partners in Canada. Did not have a wonderful experience. They were probably the last company I thought we would end up with, but they had had a change of leadership, and the chemistry was very good. And so that's my second caveat to people. The first is to start early and get yourself ready. But I'd also say be open minded, even if you think you know something about the organization that you're talking to. Things change all the time in cannabis, and people change all the time. So that's what I would say.
One of the pieces of your story that's so incredible is that you owned 100% of the company and you were cash flowing and you were profitable early. Last week I had Bo Whitney from Whitney Economics on to our podcast, and he was talking about how only 25% of all cannabis businesses are profitable right now. And so you bootstrapped and got yourself profitable and got yourself cash flowing. It sounds like still to this day, 75% of the industry can't do that. Do you have any trades or secrets as to how you did it and why others seemingly cannot?
Yes. Well, there's some advantages to not starting with a lot of money, I would say. I used to joke sometimes at the company that I spend money like it's my own money because it is my own money. Right? So that meant that I never did some of the flashier, more high profile stuff that other people did. I would look at, so and so would do this incredible advertising campaign or this $1 million collab with some big brand. And I'd think, wow, that's amazing. That's cool. But there's a price to be paid for all of that stuff. And that price is that it takes a lot of money. Unless you happen to be personally wealthy, which I was not, and, willing to put your money in that way, you really can't do those things. You have to very much live within your means and live within your budget. And so, I swear this is going to sound almost naive, but it frankly didn't occur to me that I had any other option but to do it the way I did it, which was to be rather frugal, to grow the company very slowly and deliberately. One of the things that we did do, which made a huge difference, is we chose a good category that was very much a growing category, of course, the gummy category. We always worked really hard to stay ahead of the curve in terms of innovation. I could, take you through the years of things that we sort of spotted and jumped on rather early. But one of the things that we did is we started our out of state expansion well ahead of most other people. So we did our first out of state deal probably when the company was about 3.5 years old and Oregon legalized at that point in time. And then we moved to Nevada. And then before you knew it, we had sort of gotten this expertise in how to do that. And we chose an asset light model. So we didn't get licenses, we didn't build out facilities, we found people to partner with. And every model has its challenges, and I always say they're all hard. It's really just a question of what kind of hard you're willing to go through. But our kind of hard didn't require a ton of money. And because we were good at getting to markets quickly, we were able to get really a lot of that early, when prices were still high and competition was still low, and we could build market share really effectively. So it all started to really snowball in terms of that the out of state part of the business really became the cash flow generator. Colorado always did extremely well also, but it's one state, right, with a limited number of people, et cetera, and more competition moving in. So it was really our ability to get to new markets quickly and to execute on those markets quickly that made the difference for us.
I absolutely love the quote that you said of, I spend money like it's my own because it is. And for Vangst, we were bootstrapped when I was in my dorm for 2015, then 2016, 2017, and in 2018 we went down, for better or worse, we went down the venture path. And I've spent a lot of time reflecting on how I think we could have done a better job with the capital that we raised. But you feel this so much pressure, like when you go from having, we were like going payroll to payroll. Every time we hired someone, I would map out, okay, this is how much we need to make next month so that we can pay them and then hire another person to do this other thing. And then suddenly, for us, our seed round was $2.5 million. You suddenly have $2.5 million sitting in your bank account, and then our Series A, $10 million, and the Series B, $19 million. It's like really hard to stay disciplined when you suddenly get that much money. And having had gone through it, sometimes I really do wonder to myself, and my investors would probably be pissed if they're listening to this. Love you all, and we're on this journey together now. But like sometimes I wonder like what would have happened if I just would have kept bootstrapping. It would have been hard, and there have been a lot of sleepless nights. But do you think when you look at all the entrepreneurs out there, do you think that people should bootstrap, or do you think that they should raise capital? Bootstrapping seemed to really, really work well for you.
You know what? I shared this recently on another podcast that I did, but what I would say is whether to bootstrap or raise capital is a function of the structure of your business and what your business needs to succeed. But what I would say, and this was told to me by Kim Real from Azuka, who's one of our partners, they do our quick onset technology. She said, never raise money that you don't need. And I remember because we were talking about it at the time, I was like, well, maybe I should take some money off the table. Now I was at a point where I would have attracted investors. But the truth was I didn't need it. I didn't need it at all. It was just kind of a insurance policy. Like, what if it all goes to hell? At least I'll get this money out. And so I didn't end up doing it. And of course, it ended up being the best thing in the world that I didn't end up doing it. So I think that it really depends on your business model. There are some businesses that they just require a lot of capital. If you are an MSO and you're setting up cultivation and retail and manufacturing in 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 different markets, you're going to need a lot of capital to do that, and you are not going to be able to bootstrap that. If you're a brand, I would argue that some brands take money maybe a little bit too early and then get into that. We've got a lot of money now. Now we're going to act like a big company, right? And they're going to do some stuff with their money that maybe if it were their own money, they wouldn't choose to do. So it depends on the business. What I would say, in all honesty to people, so I don't give people sort of the wrong impression, is that you have to understand that when we started, it was a very different environment, right? It was not nearly as difficult to get on the shelf. And, people were not expecting constant promotions and constant discounting and buying shelf space, and many of the dynamics that we now face in the markets that we operate in that do require money. So part of it was luck and timing, and part of it was discipline and not taking money on that I didn't really need at that point in time.
And I think that that's a really good thing for people to hear, because so many times investors are like, people said to me, raise money when you don't need it. And that's kind of like listen, in our business, when COVID happened, I mean, our gigs business went down almost overnight because our customers had to operate at less than 50% capacity. So we went from having hundreds, maybe thousands of gig workers with our customers to nothing. Had we not raised money, that would have been a little bit of a jam to get us out of. So like everything I do feel like happens for a reason, but I really, really feel like from my perspective, if you can do it without raising, it just makes you a more disciplined operator. And I think Nancy proves that more than anyone else. I think about Sarah Blakely. I always think about how like you're the Sarah Blakely of our industry, because Sarah Blakely, no experience in the industry she went into. She was selling fax machines door to door. She had $5,000. She scaled, became the first woman billionaire. I always kind of like compare the two of you in my mind. And I think if people can do it, it's just so inspiring and so incredible. So you sell the business. What happens next? Like, you've reached everyone's dream. Many people are so hoping to have an outcome like you. What goes on now?
Well, in the short run, nothing much changes because I'm still the CEO of WANA. I'm still running the company. We still have so much growth and so many exciting things. In some ways, I've never been so excited, right? Because we're looking at all kinds of interesting new products and new areas and new markets and international markets, and just still a huge amount of growth to come. So my day-to-day life is happy and full just with WANA. But one of probably the most amazing thing that happened from this transaction was that I was able to start the WANA Brands Foundation, which is a private foundation that I funded with $50 million from the transaction. And that is really such an interesting and joyful experience for me. I never had any experience with nonprofits. I've worked in the private sector my entire career, but there's many things that I'm passionate about just as a person in this world, and things that I want to be part of supporting. And it's been this enormous growth opportunity for me and learning curve for me. I'm a very steep learning curve kind of a person. I always like to be learning new things and having a lot of intellectual stimulation. And I have way more to go in terms of understanding and learning about what it means to be a conscious philanthropist and what it means to make choices that make real impact in the world. So certainly that. I really look forward to, helping Canopy with the next round of transition, which is the formation of Canopy USA, which will roll up WANA and Acreage and Jetty, which is a California vape brand. That's a great, great brand. I'm on the board of that organization. I'm having a lot of fun intellectual challenges trying to figure out how that all works together. And then I hope to travel the world and just, really enjoy life for a while. I'm sure I'll do boards. I hope that I'll have some interesting, wonderful people to mentor. But yeah, that's kind of my next go round, is a lot of philanthropy and trying to figure out how to help WANA continue to be successful in kind of a new situation.
You talked about how all this somewhat started because your daughter had a friend over. How has it been with your kids growing up in the business and being a full-time mom and being a full-time CEO? Something that I don't have kids yet, but it's something that I'm thinking about in the future, so I'm always curious to ask people.
Well, one of my daughters is sitting in the background here, so I guess we could ask her. But Um,
Yeah, bring her hun.
um, I think my kids, they their understanding of what the business was all about grew as the business grew. When we started in Colorado, they were both school age. They were one was in middle school, and the other was in high school. And the explanation, which was true, which is this is a medical marijuana company. We are here to create products that help people with their medical conditions, and they mostly bought that. And then, of course, as adult use came along and the company began to shift, we were always very honest about what we were doing with the kids, and I think it's it's of course always challenging to be a working parent and to do a good job on both of those things. But they grew up with me working even before I started Juana's. So it's not like they ever had a stay at home mom and then that shifted at some point. The nature of the business is a challenging one, I think, to navigate with kids and to um, be sending them the right messages about why are we doing this and what are some of the pros and cons of you as a person using uh, cannabis. But it all kind of worked out. The thing that makes me very happy, just going back to the foundation, is that um, my kids are interested in becoming involved with that, and one daughter in particular is very interested. We just got off a call where we were going through some different grant applications, and so that makes me very happy to think that that kind of a legacy will also be carried on.
And as you move into the foundation and we're working on this, is there any sectors that you're mostly excited about, or is it broad? I'm thinking if people are listening and they might want to get in touch with the foundation, is there any categories that you're mostly passionate about?
There is. We actually have a number of categories, and it was interesting because it's when we first started, I thought, well, this is too much. Many of them are extensions of what we were already doing through our corporate social responsibility through the company, but now, of course, we can do it at a much larger scale. So some of it has to do with the industry itself. So I'm extremely interested in because I'm so interested in innovation for the company. I'm also interested in fueling what really provides for innovation, which is research. So, for example, we made a gift of $2 million to the Johns Hopkins Cannabis Lab and $1 million to their psychedelics lab because those things fund cannabis research in general. On the psychedelic side, it also funds another area that I'm really passionate about, which is mental health, because so much of the research on psychedelics is being done as real breakthrough possibilities for mental health. And the results are really astounding. I was recently at the MAPS conference. I think you were there too, were you not?
Some people on our team were there, but I heard about it.
Yeah, I saw some folks from Thanks there. So that's an area of real interest and passion for me. Um, Social justice is a huge issue in the industry and for me personally. And so we fund a whole bunch of organizations, both inside of cannabis and outside of cannabis, that are really in support of social justice and other marginalized communities. We made a very large contribution to Out Boulder, which is the LGBTQ organization in Boulder, and they touch on a whole bunch of our issues. So, obviously, a marginalized community, social justice, mental health through the programs that they offer, and also community connection. One of the other areas that we really focus on is sustainability and climate change. And that one's been a really fascinating one for me because and this summer is a great indication, right, of what's happening to our earth. While it was an area that I was really interested in, I really knew nothing about it. So very steep learning curve. trying to understand the things that really move the needle on climate change is its own life's work, right? And I'm at the very kind of beginning of that as well. We also fund a lot of organizations that work with food security. We started this several years ago for 420. We renamed it at WANA Forward 20, that we want to play it forward. And so rather than just doing a bunch of t-shirts and other swag, what we did is we funded a nonprofit in every one of our markets who works in different kinds of ways with food security. So we did obviously food banks and that sort of thing, but we also did urban gardens. We did people who were standing up groceries in food deserts, people who worked on food waste, which of course also has a lot of sustainability issues because it takes such a toll on the environment to grow food and to create food. And then 40% of the food in this country goes to waste. And it goes into landfills and releases methane into the environment. So one of the things that I've really learned is that all the intersectionality between all these issues. They started out feeling very separate. And what I've learned is that they're not separate, that they're all connected to each other.
And it's cool that you can like weave them all together within the WANA Foundation.
It's so cool. And it's really one of the things in our scoring forms. It's one of the things that we look for is we look for innovations in the organizations that we fund. And we look for how are they addressing intersectionality? What are they doing to address more than one issue? And that part of it is usually pretty clear because, if you take communities of color, for example, their outcomes are worse in terms of health, in terms of mental health, in terms of food security, domestic violence, almost every issue that you can talk about, they're disadvantaged, right? So everything is interconnected. And that's been one of the real amazing, interesting areas for me as I've just really started on this journey.
Well, we're coming up on the time, and of course, I've got a bunch of questions I didn't get to, so we'll have to, hopefully, we can have you come back on. But what I wanted to wrap was, of course, this was an incredible success story. You exited your business for an incredible outcome. There's a lot of folks out there right now in cannabis who are really, really struggle city. We see it all the time. We're a hiring company, and so we're seeing all the layoffs front and center. Last year was the first year that we saw a decrease in jobs. The industry actually lost more employees than it gained, and it's just no secret that the industry is struggling. What advice do you have for those operators out there right now that are looking to get to the other side of it? Is part one of my question, and part two is, if you had a crystal ball, where do you see us going in the short term?
As an industry?
Yeah.
Yeah. Don't have a crystal ball.
I wish we all did.
I wish we all did. Let me start with the first part of your question. So, I used to joke that the cannabis industry was made of a bunch of magpies and that we all chased after every new shiny object. And I do think, certainly initially, it just seemed like there were so many different avenues and so many ways to go. I think focus is incredibly important. I think you need to be very clear about what you're trying to accomplish, and that's what you need to focus on. This is not the time, if you don't have a good, strong financial base and a good, strong customer base, this is not the time to overextend yourself. Either financially, but also just bandwidth-wise. I think this kind of an environment is draining, right? And I think you really need to be very clear on what it is that you're trying to execute on. In terms of how to get through this part, that's a tricky one because, and to your point earlier, which I do appreciate, when people say raise money when you don't need it, there is some truth to that because I think the natural inclination when an industry is stressed and businesses started to get stressed is people begin to pull back on things that feel discretionary. Branding and marketing, certainly always among those. And while I think it's
hiring,
exactly. While it is judicious to cut back on the aspects of that might not be mission critical to the focus we were just talking about. If you look at any Harvard Business School case study, they will all tell you that the companies that invest in branding and marketing and strategic hires in times of recession or pullback are usually the companies that end up thriving. But of course, you have to have some cash flow to do that. So, be really clear on your strategy and spend the money on the things that directly support your strategy is the other thing that I would say in terms of how to get through this. And on a more personal level, I'd say make sure you've got a really strong support system. It's really hard as an entrepreneur to go through this without that. And, I know I have depended on my cannabis friends so much over the years to be able to call them up and commiserate and cry and rage and complain and vent and all of those things that we really need to do. And also to encourage each other, to remind people that this is a point in time. This isn't going to last forever. Things are going to stabilize. So you have to get through it emotionally. You have to take care of yourself, and you have to really focus and invest strategically.
And that is the best answer ever. I'm going to re-listen to that. I'm going to play it for our whole company that doesn't listen. If they don't listen to the whole episode, we're playing that clip. And then, just my last question and my last part of it is, where do you see us going from here as an industry with, I was just hearing that, SAFE didn't even make it out of committee onto the House floor. And I ask this to everybody and I get a different answer from everybody, but I'm just super curious your take on, where do we go as an industry from here?
I'm going to give you a slightly different answer, I think. Well, first of all, the SAFE stuff literally changes day to day.
Day to day.
Then I heard something else today. And we hear that, Biden is committed to rescheduling. Is it 2? Is it 3? We don't know, right? So there's all of who knows on the federal side. What I would say is very interesting right now is this sort of interplay right now between the regulated cannabis industry and the hemp-derived THC industry, and how that is going to both create issues but also create opportunities. And that people should be thinking very strategically about how they're going to operate in those two spaces and where they both have a place and where we should be trying like heck to make sure that public safety is put first, and get some of that stuff out of the marketplace. It looks very much to me like that's going to be left up to the states to figure out, that we're probably not going to see federal action, even with the Farm Bill relook after 5 years this year. But I do think that we are moving towards a time when we're going to start thinking of ourselves as a cannabinoid industry and not a cannabis industry specifically, and that we're going to need to be looking rather holistically at the whole landscape and how we operate as businesses. So I'm very interested in seeing how this begins to play itself out.
I do think that for all the trying times that we've gone through, it is very cool to we're going to look back in a decade and be able to tell the story. I mean, we already have a decade of a story to tell, and in another decade, there's another piece of the story to tell. And it is, when you zoom out, it is just so cool to be part of building this. And, Nancy, the queen of legal cannabis, the Martha Stewart of edibles, thank you so much for joining me today on the podcast. You're just an incredible inspiration to me personally as another female founder in the space, and your story is just one of the best stories I've ever heard in the space, and so happy for you and can't wait to see what you continue to do. So thank you for being here with me today.
Thank you. And I have to tell you that I think you're pretty darn amazing too. When I was in college, it never frankly would have occurred to me to do the things that you did. So congratulations to you as well.
Well, thanks for saying that. And I'm sure we'll see each other at the next Patrick's next CEO meetup.
Sure. Yep.
Have a good day. Don't overheat today in Boulder.
All right. Thank you.